we are back with a new episode of APIM Hotrod. I'm Massimo Crippa, and I'm here with the great Stephane Eskens.
Hey. Hello, Massimo. Thanks for that introduction. So, yeah, I'm Stefan, as Massimo said. So, what are we going to talk about today, Massimo?
Yes, last time we as you know, this is always your wonderful map is our polar star, and we are using your map, Stefan, to just navigate this show to help us finding the way through the wonderful world of API management. Last time we focused on the design branch here on
Yeah.
in your map, and we look at the topologies. Today we will go and explore a little bit the architectural styles, the one that you saw at your customer. What I saw the most in my case, we go through all of these three ones. So layered, BizTalk-like, flat. Do you want Stepan to start with one of those as you prefer?
Yes, of course. So, well, actually, I can maybe start with the BizTalk-like, right? Because this is not so common, but actually, yeah, I mean, of course, some people still do BizTalk today, and it used to be heavily used actually on premises, right? And so now, let's say, future BizTalk is more Azure iPaaS. Maybe it would not be so pleasant to hear for some BizTalk, let's say, folks, but that's, let's say, how it evolves basically. But since so I have worked with customers that usually that still use a lot BizTalk, and so they wanted to replicate a little bit a BizTalk-like pattern in the cloud, right? So using the iPaaS building blocks, and maybe Massimo, I think we have a diagram that can show a little bit, yeah, support a little bit the discussion here. So that's actually something that you can find on my GitHub repo. And basically, the whole point of this kind of architecture is to make sure that whenever you have an application that integrates with another one, you actually control everything through API management. And so, and if you have, let's say, an orchestration between, for that integration, then you would also like this to happen in say in that kind of integration landing zone, because typically when you have this, it's a centralized way of managing integrations across applications, right? So it's not distributed, so it's a little bit, that's also why we see that less and less, because today we are more in a distributed world, but still you might face this. And so basically here, as an entry point, you have an API, right? As an exit point, you have an API as well. And so that will force every app that needs to interact with another to expose actually a contract. And that's also one of the value of this architecture approach, is that you have let's say that contract, you can, because it's centralized, you can also control, standardize really how you expose APIs, for instance, if you follow the HTTP conventions. So it has a lot of value in terms of standardization. No, the only downside of this approach is that it can become a bottleneck, right? If you have a single integration team, and that actually was the case at that customer. The integration team was doing a good job, but it became a bottleneck because it was not an entire army, so they had to basically manage all integrations of the enterprise already on prem, and so somehow they wanted to extend this in the cloud, because they really wanted to have this high level of standardization and centralization to make sure they could control all integrations. But then, of course, it can be, block a little bit agility and so on. So, but that's a possible pattern that I've seen in the real world that you might be confronted to. And basically, so APIM entry point, APIM exit point. Inside, you can use functions, service bus queues, topics, well, whatever you want, logic apps. So basically, we'll orchestrate the integration itself, right? The integration
And
flow.
here, in this case, mainly the role of API management I see, or in this example, is a sort of security broker. One role, like so those function in this illustrative image, they might have their API keys. You don't want to keep those. This is internal kitchen. You don't want to expose it outside to
Yeah,
the outside world where you want to go with
yeah,
JWT token in this case.
yeah,
So this is one rules. Then you talk
yeah.
about contract. Maybe some data validation might or might not be done at API management side. So this
Yeah.
is a very classic. So I also saw this a lot, especially in iPaaS, as you mentioned, right?
Yeah, yeah, indeed. One
And
of
you
the
know,
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Massimo.
One question, sometimes, because let's bring also question of customers that people ask, okay, but I understand and I see the value on the API management on the receive side, so the inbound, what is the value on the outbound? I don't know if you ever get that kind of questions.
Yeah, yeah, of course, of course. So basically, indeed, we see. I think probably you could say that 95% of the case you only use APIM for inbound. I think that's more or less the average. That's not. It's an empiric observation, of course. I don't have real numbers, but that's what I see mostly on the field. But for outbound, in this case, if it's um, two different apps from the same, let's say, enterprise, somehow it's both inbound if you want, right? Because from application A perspective, they go outbound to app B, then there is something, and then you see, so basically somehow it's not really outbound to an outside service. You see, so because that could also be a use case which I don't see often, where you really proxy an external service that is not one of your services with APIM, and that is mostly when you do that. First, it's challenging because a lot of external services do not publish their open API definitions, or whatever contract if you would use protobuf and so on. So then it's up to you to build that layer. So that's a bit challenging, and it's subject to change and so on. But one of the values of this that can happen from time to time is when, for instance, the remote party asks you to provide, for instance, let's say a fixed IP address, right? Then you could use your outbound VIP off your API management instance. But that's really something that I try to avoid, let's say, right? Because you it's actually quite hard to inject the remote APIs, let's say, or third-party APIs into your gateway, because most of the time they don't provide the open API definitions. And Azure is a good example of this. If you see all the Azure APIs, try to find the open API definitions. Not gonna be easy, right? So you
Yeah.
see, so that's the downside. But if in this case, actually, you also use the outbound if you want, because you have an orchestration. So you want to make sure that when you reach out back, you go also through APIM, but somehow it's still for one of your APIs that you fully control, that can
Yeah, yeah, I
expose the
do.
you see, that can expose that can produce the open API definition or whatever contract type that you are dealing with.
Yeah, and
Um,
also on this, what I saw, like to just add, sometimes it might be when you just proxy, as we were saying, the external API. Also, from a security reason, sometimes you say, okay, if I centralize or if I proxy that API, suppose that he has some particular security scheme, etc., depending, of course, which kind of control you have on the gateway. But
yeah,
you could use that gateway to facilitate or to make uniform the way that you call
yeah, yeah,
that
as an
to avoid a sort
abstraction
of
layer. Yeah, yeah,
shadow IT where
indeed.
the security key is distributed in a
Yeah.
very different way, even if you should leverage a key vault and these kind of things. But that is a scenario that sometimes, every now and then, it pops up.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, indeed, indeed. Just one thing as well, you see in the middle of that diagram, you see a service bus. So, you know that now we try to privatize everything, right? So to use private endpoints. And so today, still for service bus, that's one of the challenge that I faced at that customer, is that they had a lot of in Azure. So on-prem, it was all BizTalk, and in Azure, it was all point to point, right? So it was a bit chaotic. So that's why they wanted to, um, restore some decent, let's say, integrations in the cloud. And then actually they had like more than a few hundred service bus namespaces. So it's quite a lot, right? So because it was point to point, so almost every app had its own namespace, and they had a lot of integrations. But then, of course, if you centralize and at the same time you try to make it more secure, and you try to only use private endpoints for service bus, today it's still the premium flavor only that supports private endpoint and even just firewall rules. So, of course, with that, you cannot end up with 100 service buses anymore. Otherwise, it will cost you a lot of money. And so that's also what you see a little bit on the diagram. You see some roles, right? And the thing is that that is a challenge. Because if you have a lot of entities today in service bus, unlike API management, we don't have the notion of workspace, right? So you cannot just say all the entities belonging to project A are under a certain namespace, and then you give only a workspace level access. You see what I mean? So you need to do either namespace access, either entity level access. And that can be challenging for your RBAC. So the number of role assignments that you can assign is actually limited in a subscription. It's 5,000. But if you already have like hundreds, or thousands of entities, you could actually quite reach that quite fast before you notice. So that's something you have to pay attention to if you go to centralized mode and you want to try to lock it down as well. Pay attention to the service bus if you don't use the public one.
Yes, very well said. Thank you for
So,
that.
yeah,
So
no
let's go
problem.
back, for example, to our map here. So here in the architecture side, one of the most used, I believe, is the flat style, where you just have basically what you have on the back end. You do have you expose via your API management, and then you just there is a sort of URL rewriting on your gateway, right? Over there is what I like, especially when we are using an API first approach, when you just the design, when you have the Open API specification as a source of truth, and that's what you put in your gateway. And then what happened after, from a policy point of view, that's another story, right? So do you also see a lot, Stefan, that flat things in your experience?
Yeah, it's the dominant. It's the dominant approach. So what I see, is basically so that you simply have your APIs on the API gateway, right, for on the APIM instance, and then it's an abstraction layer. Indeed, you can apply policies and so on, but mostly I don't see like a lot of it's really a direct integration between the API in the APIM instance and your backend service. And indeed, that's what you see. So sometimes, of course, you might see that, for instance, you don't expose all the operations, or you might have multiple APIs. That's something that you can see, but that's more BFF. So this is also in the common pattern. So that's something, it's still flat. But I think it's worth mentioning that you might have a single backend and have two APIs that are, for instance, on the gateway, right, to serve different needs by consumer needs. You see what I mean? So it's still
Yeah,
flat somehow as an architecture style. It's flat, but you already have some kind of difference. It's not a one-one mapping anymore. Yeah, so that's why I
exactly.
highlight this one.
And those also, especially for providing a sort of different user experience, let's call it a sort of multi-channel approach, even if or omni-channel approach, even if it's more BFF style, but also from a security point of view, right? So you want to decide which HTTP methods you want to expose,
Yeah,
which operation, which you can say the same. So it's really like not. Sometimes it's a compound, sometimes it's a filtering, sometimes it is a split, as you were mentioning. But at the end of the day, those are also I do believe, or I see this case as a flat kind of implementation, right?
yeah, indeed. That remains flat. So
And
it's not
because you
really a
said that you
one-one.
mentioned, I want to say the BFF things that years
Yeah,
ago I was calling it compound.
yeah,
Today
yeah,
is more going to the GraphQL style. Maybe we'll do an episode in the coming weeks just
yeah,
on the GraphQL, how it
yeah,
works, etc., etc.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
where you really can combine different things that are really looking different, potentially also combining REST and GraphQL into a GraphQL
yeah, yeah, yeah,
BFF.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
That maybe we will just dedicate a single episode on the GraphQL. I think it should be a
Indeed.
nice one.
So basically, the patterns that we see, BFF, gateway offloading, and so on, it's somehow independent of the architecture style. So you can use any of these patterns, whatever architecture style you are dealing with. But of course, a flat does not mean one only. Let's say that's the point.
Very well said. And now I'm sorry, you said it, and my eyes are going to that common patterns. And so it was to mention that the gateway routing and circuit breaker has been recently, let's say, announced or recently been embedded into a policy, or there is a
Yeah,
new features around gateway routing and circuit breaker,
yeah,
and
yeah,
which is
yeah,
pretty interesting. And actually, if you were yesterday, I think at Azure B in
yeah,
it was yesterday evening. There were a session about circuit breaker and API management.
I missed it,
Our
but
dear
indeed,
friend of the program that I say hello to if he's watching this.
no, that's nice. No, indeed, and I think circuit breaker nowadays in heavily distributed systems, that's always a nice feature. And again, you might say I can do that in code as well. But the whole point of components like API management or a WAF or whatever or service mesh if you are in the Kubernetes world is actually to not rely only on application code. And so it's also good to know that that's also a way to standardize, right? So to outside of the code, so you can standardize your code, of course, but there is also a way to have extra guarantees, let's say, when you have these kind of features in non-code, let's say outside of the code.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have still, we commit to stay around 20 minutes. So we still have 5 minutes to go through this layered approach,
Yeah.
like system APIs at the bottom, process API, and then on the top, the experience API to guarantee the sort of omni-channel approach.
Yeah.
So I can just show to you an article I put it here where we faced something like this some years ago, and this blog post from Codit, and over there it's basically is the same. Here is called adapter, service, and channel. So the adapter is the one that is more at the bottom, meaning the adapter is what is called system, and all the way up to the experience API. And here this article just explain a little bit how, if you want to embed these 3 layers into API management, it makes sense for your use case. There are a couple of ways to do it by using the rewrite URI policy, or if you prefer, like in this example, using the send request, you will then manage the response this way, and then it will be the response handed over to the other stages of the policy pipelines. And end of the day, this article just go through some pain points that the team had. And end of the day, they just say, hey guys, if you want to do these things into API management, please do remember to use the
extra header.
For example, the 127.01 to loop back to the same gateway. But please do remember to add the host header, which is used internally to, let's say, to address the gateway. So without that address, it will not work. Did you also, Stephane, experience some customer these 3 I mean, it's pretty
Actually,
common, to be honest.
to say the truth, I only experienced that with MuleSoft, which is then not API management, but you might know, right, MuleSoft, and that's actually maybe I see you. Maybe you want to say something, maybe Massimo?
No, I just want to say that I'm not surprised. Why? Because I have a certain age, so I'm not sure that my memory is fine, but I think that this 3-layer things is something that has been introduced by MuleSoft, if I recall properly.
Indeed. No, that's I have the same impression. So I think it's indeed a MuleSoft. Let's say it's baked into their product. So I'm not, of course, advertising for MuleSoft here, but actually it's, let's say, in their product it's completely intuitive, right? So in APIM, I wanted to mention that it's not that I see that, to be honest, really on the field for people using APIM, but this is technically feasible. And actually, the blog post you showed is actually showing this. What are the pain points? It's also showing that it's a bit counterintuitive in API management, right? That you see that the product has not been built exactly for this, but this is feasible. So if you come from that's actually why also I wanted to put that in the map. So if you come from the MuleSoft world, and there are still a lot of MuleSoft people, right? Then you might say, yeah, in API management, can I do that? No, you can do it. It might not be as intuitive as in MuleSoft, but this is feasible, right? So that was a bit the goal.
Is not built in the practice, the way of working, but like the flexibility of the policy engine, which is the core of the service. It allows you to do that.
Indeed. So it was worth mentioning that in the as an architecture style, since it is indeed possible and feasible.
Yeah, and it works in one of our customers where we have this kind of implementation. Actually, they just build up those 3 layers, but with a certain amount of APIs. So I mean, not with few, maybe. I mean, with a certain complexity and a certain user base. And at the end of the day, if that kind of approach, which makes sense for your company, yeah, it's definitely supported and it delivers what it promises.
Yeah, the value you expect. Yeah, indeed.
Okay, so
Good.
I think we are lovely reached our
Target
20 minutes with these three things, and yeah, I'm good for today. What do you think, Stephane?
Yeah, I think it's good for today as well. Yeah, we'll start a new chapter next time.
Yes, yes. Future will tell. We will see. Anyway, you know where we are sealing. So what is our overall scope? Is this map? If you want to address any specific topic, feel free to just reach us to us to let us know via LinkedIn or via Twitter or via email. We will for sure discuss one of your interesting topics. Okay?
Yeah, good, great. So Massimo, thank you, right?
Thank you, Stefan.
Have a
Have a
nice
nice
long
day,
weekend.
everyone. Have a
Thank you.
nice weekend
Thanks
and see
everyone.
you
See
next week.
you. Yeah, see you. Thank you, Massimo. Bye.